Have you ever held on to a belief so strongly that it became part of your identity, only to watch the world suddenly flip and start questioning everything you thought was true? If you've ever loved a dog the way you love a member of your own family, then you'll immediately understand why this story carries so much weight. Tia Torres wasn't only rescuing pit bulls, she was saving people too. Then one day everything shifted, and that's when the questions began. Today we're diving deep into a devastating moment that forever changed how many people view her. So what really happened to Tia Torres? Let's talk about it. What happened to Tia Torres from pit bulls and parolees? If you've ever truly loved a dog, you know they're far more than just pets. They become family. They listen when no one else will. They sleep at your feet and wait by the door like you've been gone for years, even if it was only an hour. So when something goes horribly wrong, it doesn't just feel like loss. It feels like betrayal. Like your heart was deceived. That brings us to the question so many people quietly ask but hesitate to voice. What happened to Tia Torres from pit bulls and parolees? On January 17, 2020, a little girl was celebrating her 4th birthday. She had a dog she adored, one her parents had given her the Christmas before. This wasn't just any dog. She threw him tea parties, sang to him, begged her parents to buy him special toys, and even got him his own pooper scooper so she could help take care of him. But on her birthday, in a single horrifying instant, the dog snapped, and the little girl was gone. Her baby sister witnessed the entire tragedy. To this day she still remembers her screams, and she still asks God to bring her big sister back. The dog hadn't been wild or dangerous, at least not before that day. He had been loving, gentle. Everything Tia Torres had ever said about pit bulls could have been true, because the little girl's parents had watched pit bulls and parolees faithfully, yet they still lost everything. Out of grief, the mother wrote a letter to Tia. She said, "You are the biggest reason I allowed that dog into my home. I bought into your theory. I followed your advice, and now my daughter is dead." So when people ask what happened to Tia Torres from pit bulls and parolees, this is part of the answer. It wasn't just the show or the rescue center, it was both. It was the heartbreak, the questions, the responsibility. When you stand up for something, there are people who will hold you accountable when it breaks. But this story doesn't end here, and neither does Tia's. To understand everything that came next, you have to look at both sides of the truth, because even after the worst happens, some people still feel driven to help the very animals others have given up on, and that's exactly where Tia Torres comes in. The making of Villalobos Rescue Center. If you're the kind of dog lover who keeps old photos of your first pup or can't walk past a shelter without looking inside, you already understand what we're about to say. Villalobos didn't begin with a big team in matching shirts. It started in the dry, lonely California desert with a few wolf dogs and a woman who wasn't even trying to become famous. Tia Torres saw animals no one else wanted, and she couldn't look away. The name Villalobos comes from the Spanish words for village of wolves. And back then, that's exactly what it was. Tia Torres, a handful of loyal volunteers, some misunderstood wolf dogs, and more vet bills than any of them could handle. But something unexpected happened. Tia started noticing a pattern. At shelters, other dogs were being treated the same way wolves were, discarded, mislabeled, feared simply because of how they looked. And those dogs were mostly pit bulls. People didn't see them as pets. They saw them as threats. One bite on record, one growl behind a cage, one bad headline, and that dog was finished. If you've ever loved a pit bull, you know how wrong that is. Tia did. Not just because she'd worked with animals her whole life, but because she saw the same kind of judgment thrown at people too. So she started hiring ex-convicts. These men, fresh out of prison, carried their own scars, and somehow the dogs trusted them faster than anyone else. The early days were tough. Tia didn't have grants or big donors. She paid the bills by working as an animal trainer on movie and TV sets. Meanwhile, the rescue operated right out of her home in Agua Dulce. By the early 2000s, Villalobos wasn't just surviving, it was growing. Dozens of pit bulls had found safety behind her fences. Every single dog that came through those gates received real care. If they needed medical treatment, they got it. If they were terrified, the team had the patience to help them learn to trust again. Some of those dogs had never been touched gently in their entire lives. They didn't even know how to accept love. So Villalobos became the place where they slowly, patiently learned what safety felt like with humans. Only after that could they even begin thinking about adoption. Then came 2011. After nearly 20 years in California, Tia and her team decided to pack up everything and move across the country to southeast Louisiana. The move wasn't random. Years earlier, during Hurricane Katrina, Tia had been part of rescue efforts, pulling stranded, starving dogs out of flood waters. The memory of that devastation never left her. It took almost a year to plan, but they finally relocated from LA to the Big Easy. And they didn't stop there. In 2014 they expanded again, opening a second Villalobos location on the back roads of Assumption Parish, about an hour and a half outside New Orleans. With that move, her little village of wolves now had deep roots in the south, from wolf dogs in the desert to pit bulls in the bayou. Villalobos Rescue Center had become something massive. And if you've ever looked into the eyes of a dog who thought no one was coming back for them, you already know why it matters, the weight behind the mission. What many people never see beyond the rescue stories on television is the enormous machine running behind the scenes. Villalobos Rescue Center didn't grow into a sanctuary overnight. And it didn't stay in the same place it started. Today the mission has expanded far beyond just pit bulls. While they remain the heart of Tia's work, the overwhelming need across the South forced Villalobos to open its gates to all breeds. That decision didn't come easily. But the suffering of countless dogs left behind, especially those infected with deadly heartworm, couldn't be ignored. At the time, almost every dog that entered the rescue was already battling heartworm. Treatment took months and cost hundreds of dollars per animal. What most supporters don't realize is the real cost of caring for just one dog, over $1,000, covering medical exams, treatments, food, spay/neuter procedures, and more. With nearly 40 new dogs arriving each month, that adds up to a staggering amount of responsibility, over $10,000 every single day just to keep the doors open. The rescue now spans Louisiana, with one center in New Orleans and another in Assumption Parish. There's even a facility in Northeast Texas dedicated solely to wolf dogs, but with growth came even greater pressure. Villalobos is legally required to work directly with animal control in Assumption Parish, and by law they cannot turn away dogs from that rural area. Every day they are flooded with desperate pleas, people begging for help, for safety, for a second chance for dogs in crisis. Hundreds are turned away every day, not because they don't care, but because the requests far exceed what they can handle. Emails arrive by the thousands. Sometimes people show up in person, traveling across states, appearing at the gates without warning, hoping to meet Tia or drop off a dog from another state. Some even arrive in the middle of the night, yelling, crying, demanding to be heard. Tia isn't always there. And when desperation crosses into danger, even the police have to be called. And no matter how famous the show became or how big the rescue grew, it was never meant to carry the weight of the entire country's dog crisis. But sometimes people forget that, and amid the heartbreak, pain, and countless lives Tia and her team have tried to save, the pressure only grows heavier. The night Tia's life took a turn for a while, life at the rescue felt steady, things were good. Tia was at a fan meet and greet. Everyone was having fun. The energy in the room was light. At one point one of her twins asked if she could grab a quick picture. Tia reacted spontaneously. She could have walked around the couch like anyone else, but in a split-second decision, she decided to hop over the back. As she swung her right leg over, her left leg caught. Her whole body twisted in a way it wasn't supposed to. Then came a loud snap. When she pulled up her pants, what she saw turned stomachs. Her knee wasn't where a knee is supposed to be, it had completely shifted to the side. Panic set in instantly. It was around 3 a.m. when the family rushed her to the hospital. When her sister got the call, she didn't just panic, she was confused because things were far worse than anyone realized. When Tia finally came out of the anesthesia fog, she looked down at her leg and realized she had already undergone surgery, but that was only the beginning, because this wasn't just about her recovery. Her first thought wasn't herself. It was the rescue. How was she supposed to care for the dogs? How could she run the place if she couldn't even walk? She felt completely helpless, and that helplessness was the hardest part to sit with. But this wasn't the only battle Tia faced. While some were deeply personal, quite a few came from completely outside forces. Tia Torres finally tells the truth. For over a year, something heavy had been weighing on Tia Torres's shoulders, something she couldn't talk about, no matter how much it tore at her inside. It wasn't just a minor legal issue. It was a full-blown war, and not just for her, but for the rescue, for the dogs, and for everything she had built over decades. But the silence is finally over. It all started with what seemed like an act of kindness. About 3 years earlier, a struggling pit bull rescue in Detroit was in deep trouble. They had somewhere between 50 and 60 dogs and nowhere left to go. So Tia, being who she is, opened her heart and her New Orleans facility to them. It was supposed to be temporary, but a year and a half later she had to make the painful decision to ask them to leave. And what they left behind was worse than anyone could have imagined. Inside that building it looked like a horror scene. The stench was unbearable. Everything was in chaos. Worst of all, there were the bodies of dead dogs scattered around. For someone who has seen nearly everything in animal rescue, Tia said she had never witnessed anything this horrific. But it didn't end there. As they left, they also took 5 of Villalobos's dogs with them. Tia and her team fought hard, and eventually got them back, but what followed was an avalanche of legal madness. The 2 individuals from the Detroit rescue were ultimately hit with criminal charges in Michigan, including animal cruelty, possession of stolen property, and illegal firearm possession. Now you would think that would be the end of the chaos, but no, the Detroit team then turned around and sued Tia in civil court. Their goal? To gain custody of the very same 5 dogs they were accused of mistreating. Let that sink in. These were dogs that Tia's team had poured time, love, and thousands of dollars into saving, and the people charged with harming them were now trying to take them back through the legal system. It was twisted, exhausting, and it left Tia fighting tooth and nail just to protect what was already hers. Because of a gag order imposed by their lawyers, she couldn't speak publicly. Even though she had evidence that could have flipped the entire narrative, she had to stay silent while they dragged her name and her rescue through the mud, all the while burning through legal fees, time, and emotional energy. She spent over $100,000 fighting the case. Money that could have gone directly to saving more dogs, yet she never gave up. In the end the court dismissed the case, and the dogs, now known as the Crescent City 5, were safe. It felt like the end of an era, but was it really the end? Was it the end of an era? After 18 heartfelt seasons, Pit Bulls and Parolees, the gritty, emotional Animal Planet series that followed the lives of misunderstood dogs and the ex-convicts who cared for them, finally came to a close. The show, centered at Villalobos Rescue Center in New Orleans, had built a legacy almost impossible to match. Since its debut in 2009, when the shelter was still based in Agua Dulce, California, it had become far more than television. It had become a movement. In 2011 the rescue relocated to New Orleans, reportedly to stabilize its financial situation. From there the mission only grew stronger. challenging ugly myths about pit bulls and giving parolees a second chance at life, and at the center of it all stood Tia Torres. When the announcement came that season 19 would be the last, fans were stunned. Tia didn't sugarcoat it either. Through a Facebook post she made it clear. Villalobos wasn't shutting down. It was a business decision. It turned out the Discovery Network, home to Animal Planet, had been sold to Warner Brothers, one of those massive tech conglomerates now pulling strings behind the scenes, with corporate hands in the mix and shows across the board being cut. Pit bulls and parolees became one of many casualties, but Tia had seen it coming. The cameras had stopped rolling long before the official cancellation. COVID had already made things complicated. Filming slowed dramatically. Despite being promised a 22-episode season, it never materialized. When no one from production could give a straight answer about the show's future, Tia knew she couldn't wait around. So she built something new, the Rabid Reality, an online network where fans could still connect with her world. Podcasts, web series, raw behind-the-scenes stories. She explained it plainly. Having her ideas constantly rejected by TV executives who thought they knew better had finally pushed her to her limit. On the Rabid Reality website her tone was defiant. One can only have the door slammed in their face so many times, so I finally said, "Bite me," and I'm now doing my own thing. She later went live on Facebook to clear the air. There were too many factors beyond her control. The pandemic, network mergers, corporate takeovers, but one thing stung more than anything else. Some longtime viewers said they would no longer support Villalobos, simply because the cameras were gone. Tia didn't hold back. Villalobos had existed long before pit bulls and parolees, and it would continue with or without television. "I don't mean this arrogantly," she said plainly, "but the show doesn't exist without Villalobos. Villalobos has always existed without the show." Still, she admitted the visibility from TV had helped with donations. There was no denying that, but she never relied solely on the show. Not when she was rescuing dogs from dangerous streets, and not now. She launched the Rabid Reality, an online network she described as kind of like Netflix, but deeply personal. Every show, every podcast, every episode would come straight from the world she had lived and breathed for decades. It would feature the dog's life after prison, the daily grind at Villalobos, raw, unfiltered stories from her family and the people who work beside her. It's everything that kind of encompasses what we do in everyday life, she explained, and it truly was. Fans didn't have to miss out on anything. One of the flagship shows was Life with the Underdogs, a direct spiritual successor to pit bulls and parolees. Tia knew exactly what her audience wanted. "For those of you who are addicted to pit bulls and parolees, we can quench that thirst," she promised. Perhaps the most powerful part. Subscriptions started at just $3 a month, and every dollar went straight back into the rescue. As for the name, Rabid, it wasn't just about the dogs. It was about the people, the fans who refused to let the mission fade, the supporters who stayed fiercely loyal. As Tia said, "You all were rabid for the love of dogs." And that kind of passion deserved its own tribute. With the Rabid Reality, she didn't just keep the story alive, she made sure it stayed grounded. This was her voice, her mission, her way of making sure the dogs, and the people who care about them, never get left behind. To understand how Tia Torres became who she is, let's take a walk through her early life. Tia's early life, an unconventional path. Long before she was standing in front of television cameras or rescuing dogs by the dozens, Tia Torres was just a girl trying to survive. Born in 1960 and raised in Southern California, she didn't have the kind of childhood that gives you a head start. Her stepmother, the woman who raised her, gave her two things that would stay with her forever: structure and a love for animals. Unfortunately, almost everything else about her youth was unstable. By high school, Tia knew she wasn't going to follow a traditional path. She dropped out in her junior year. Not long after, she left home at age 17. She had no plan, no place to go, There were nights she slept in her car. Nights she didn't eat, but with no clear direction. She did something most people wouldn't expect from someone in her situation. She joined the army, and from that moment on, it became a matter of survival. The army gave her something she hadn't felt in years: stability, identity, and purpose. She served for 6 years, learning discipline, structure, and strength. After leaving the army, Tia returned to Los Angeles and took a job as a youth gang counselor for the city. This wasn't a comfortable office role. She was sent straight into substance houses, rough neighborhoods, and back alleys, not just to observe, but to reach out to kids who had seen too much violence and too little hope. It was there, in those broken spaces, that she realized how drawn she was to helping people others had written off. These parolees, these gang members, they were just human beings who had failed somewhere along the line, and someone needed to give them another chance. Then one day, in a moment that quietly changed the entire course of her life, Tia stopped by the Los Angeles Animal Shelter. She wasn't looking for anything in particular, but there she was, standing in a shelter hallway, when animal control officers brought in a stocky, muscular brindle pit bull. The dog had just been confiscated from the scene of a drug deal gone bad. She had cropped ears and scars that told their own story. Just as they were placing her into a kennel, she slipped free. Here's where it gets powerful. When she slipped free, she didn't run wild. She didn't attack. She ran straight toward Tia's 2 toddler daughters, Tanya and Mariah, who were lying on the ground nearby. The shelter staff froze. Everyone braced for the worst. To their shock, when the pit bull reached them, she didn't lash out. She licked their faces. Then she lay on top of them, like she was protecting them. This was a dog who had come from chaos, but she was full of gentleness, and in that moment Tia knew, this breed wasn't the monster people said it was. That dog, who came from a crime scene, was named Tatanka, and she became the very first pit bull to join what would later become a lifelong mission. At the time, Los Angeles wouldn't adopt out pit bulls. They were considered too dangerous, too unpredictable, but Tia wasn't having it. Because of her established relationship with animal control, she pushed, and she won. Tatanka was released into her care. And from that moment on, everything began. In the late 1990s, Los Angeles was painting pit bulls as villains. Every headline used words like attack or dangerous. But Tia had seen something else. She saw loyalty, gentleness, misunderstood souls, and she made it her job to prove the world wrong. By March 1999, she had built enough of a reputation that the Los Angeles City Department of Animal Services reached out. They asked if she wanted to start a support group for pit bull owners. She said yes. Together they created free spay/neuter services, training classes, education, and community support. Anything a struggling pit bull owner might need. What started as a small group grew into thousands of members, and lasted more than 11 years. People were finally getting the tools to care for and understand their dogs, and pit bulls were starting to be seen for who they really were. Now, this is where the parolees come into the picture. It began with one young man who had just been released from prison and was desperately seeking employment. Tia brought him in, because she believed in second chances, and it worked better than she ever imagined. Word spread. Other parolees began to arrive. They showed up with baggage, sure. But they also showed up with drive. They worked with the dogs, cared for them, learned from them, and in return, the dogs healed too. Villalobos Rescue Center was no longer just a place for unwanted dogs. It had become a refuge for people too. Her husband Aaron Jackson was on parole at the time. His parole agent, a man named Mr. Angeles, saw what Tia was doing and encouraged her to expand. He started sending other parolees her way. Soon she wasn't just running a rescue, she was running a full-blown rehabilitation program where both man and dog found redemption side by side. In 2009, an article featured her as one of Los Angeles's most important people. That article caught the eye of television producers. At first Tia wasn't interested. She valued her privacy. She didn't want to turn this mission into a spectacle, but the truth was, the rescue desperately needed money. So she made a deal. When the show took off, pit bulls and parolees became a lifeline for dogs and for viewers across the country. By 2010 Tia faced another hard choice. Their location in California was no longer sustainable. Costs were rising. Space was too limited. And laws around dog ownership weren't getting any easier. So she made the decision to move everything, her dogs, her staff, her entire life, to New Orleans, Louisiana. A place that desperately needed help. A place where she felt she could make the biggest difference, and from that decision came the largest pit bull rescue in the United States. Her family stood beside her through it all. Tanya and Mariah, now grown, helped run the rescue. She also adopted twin boys, Kanani and Emo, from a difficult situation, and they have become an integral part of the heart of Villalobos too, through everything, difficult marriages, including one marked by unhealthy habits and domestic abuse. She never let it define her. When her husband Aaron was sent back to prison under questionable circumstances, Tia kept going. She once said, "My mission is to rescue. I hope that one day I won't have to." If you've seen what she built from nothing, you understand how much she means it. If you thought you already knew Tia Torres, you probably hadn't heard her story like this. Tia has a podcast called Tia Talk, where she shares the version of herself that exists before the chaos of the day begins. She records each episode in the early morning hours, when her thoughts are clearest and most raw. The best part? It's free, on YouTube, Spotify, and Patreon, for anyone who wants to hear more. So if you've been wondering what happened to Tia Torres, she hasn't disappeared, she adapted. She created her own path. Maybe, in some strange way, losing the show gave her even more freedom to tell the truth about rescue. About survival. About what it really means to fight for the forgotten. What are your thoughts about Tia Torres and how she continues to pursue her passion? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more real stories like this.